want to share today how urban farming can be a vehicle for healing ourselves and our community. And the only way I know how to share that is by sharing my journey and what I've learned through these years. So I want to start. I grew up here in South Florida, to then living and going to school here at Furman University, to then moving and living here in this home in the Greater Sullivan neighborhood, directly behind Greater Greenville High School, walking distance from here. So as you can imagine, this was an intense change that forced me on a path to grapple with this dichotomy of environments. I'd like to share the history of what has now become my home, a history that you might not be aware of, the Greater Sullivan neighborhood, as many of my neighbors affectionately call the Butler Sullivan or Dean Sullivan community. A neighborhood that was birthed by hardworking, mostly working class African Americans in the early 1900s that had hopes and dreams of a better future. Our neighborhood was surrounded by textile mills, and now a remnant of an economic boom for our region that provided many jobs and growth for our city. However, during the height of this era, many of these textile mills and so many other industries left many of my African American friends systematically not hired. But nevertheless, our neighborhood was bustling with activity, with so many neighbors caring for other neighbors. There was loads of personal investment, pride, and passion. Our neighborhood even had the first community center ever built in the city. We even have a community park that is still actively used today. We even have vibrant and historic churches, one in fact that's 90 years old, that actually started by two homes that were combined together where neighbors began worshiping together. And that church today is more vibrant than ever, meeting many of the spiritual and physical needs of our neighborhood. Our neighborhood, though, was birthed in a Jim Crow era South, where many of my neighbors were educated in vibrant schools, yet unfairly underfunded by our school district. One of those historic schools, the Sullivan School, actually sat right across the street from my house that you saw in the picture. As many of you know, schools in our city and our district were not integrated until 1970. That's 16 years after the Brown versus Board of Education ruling. And by 1980, 90% of African American students in our district were bused to schools not in their own backyards. And I've learned of leaders like A.J. Wittenberg and so many others that have created a more just and prosperous future for my neighborhood. But I want to bring it to present day and share some of the difficult realities that I've learned, where roughly about 1,300 of my neighbors live. The unemployment rate is nearly double in my community compared to the region. Nearly 1 in 3 are living below the poverty line. Compare that to 3% of where I grew up. And almost half of the kids in my neighborhood are growing up in poverty. 32% of my neighbors are reporting to be in poor or fair health. 42% of my community is obese, and 1 in 4 of my neighbors have diabetes. Compare that to just 10% of where I grew up. The businesses surrounding my neighborhood largely include dollar stores and fast food joints. In other words, our community is a food desert. But back to my journey, the suburban, privileged white kid that moved into the Greater Sullivan neighborhood, with way too many woefully ignorant assumptions, many of which I'm still confronting today. But I remember when I first moved into my neighborhood, several of my neighbors actually thought I was an undercover cop that moved onto the block. And after a serious time of building trust and making friends, what I continued to learn is that there was incredible hope, resilience, and work ethic in my community. By listening with parents and pastors and community leaders, I learned that we all wanted to work together to create more opportunity for our youth to thrive. So we began by planting seeds through a small urban garden. Through a corner garden we eventually grew and started a greenhouse. And from there we began incorporating hydroponics and aquaponics to growing more food. We eventually started suburban and rural farm locations to help support our work. We first began by selling that produce in front of our neighborhood church, but then eventually we expanded to a mobile market where we could bring our fresh produce to community centers and churches and businesses across our city. We've begun going to farmers markets as well as packaging produce boxes for families. We're even in the midst of starting a market within our downtown bus station so we can reach some of the bus riders that have some of the most challenging access getting across town for healthier food. This is all sounding pretty good, right? Well, let me tell you a few of the difficult lessons we learned along the way. In the beginning, we had an early group of teens that we worked with, and I remember when we gave them their first paycheck, which was a pretty big deal in the summer. We quickly learned that they took those paychecks to a check cashing store just down the street and burned up most of their remaining money by buying fireworks. We were pretty dismayed, but we began starting personal finance classes, and we started learning that our teens didn't know how to open up a bank account. So we took them to banks, we brought in bankers, and helped building trust and skills. We learned that our teens had so many dreams for saving for college or saving for a car or being able to help out a loved one. Chris, a young adult that we worked with early in the neighborhood, who's third generation growing up in our neighborhood, it was clear when he first started working with us, he felt an immense responsibility to care for his little sister and his single mom in times of need. I remember when we gave him his first paycheck, he used most of that money to help his family survive. And it was apparent he had a God-given passion for helping others. But his path was not linear. After working with us, he graduated high school, started working odd and end jobs. But I'm happy to share that he just got a full-time job at our local hospital and is working towards becoming a nurse. We eventually began teaching entrepreneurship classes where we encouraged teens to pursue opportunities within their own communities, their own neighborhoods. They learned how to start micro-enterprises. We had a group that started mowing their neighbors' lawns. We even had a group grow microgreens in their neighborhood and sell it to downtown restaurants just up the block. Even this group here, they actually built a bike repair stand and a station within their neighborhood. Again, feeling like we were getting on the right track and getting somewhere. But another lesson we learned, teens don't eat fresh vegetables, even when they might help grow it. So we partnered with folks. We brought in nutritionists, we brought in chefs to teach culinary skills and teaching health education with local partners. We started teaching about nutrition and wellness, again, feeling like we were onto something, and we continued to learn. But again, the more we worked with our teens, we started learning about their environments, their schools, their families, and even some of their internal dialogue. We learned how stress impacts their daily decisions. For example, how stress can impact how we interact with our families and our peers. So we recently began hosting mindfulness classes that have helped equip our teens to stop and just take a few breaths before reacting to a stressful situation. Laura, one of our teens, she actually found herself having a really rough day at school, ran home to the pantry looking for an unhealthy junk food snack, like so many of us do after a bad day of work. But she shared with us, before grabbing one of those junk food snacks, she stopped, she paused, she took a few deep breaths, and chose otherwise. This may seem small, but it has taught us how tiny, seemingly insignificant decisions can have a huge impact on us for the rest of our lives. Through this work of growing food and growing jobs, we have learned that it takes a holistic and integrated approach where we can have mutual exchange for learning and sharing, especially with youth that come from a variety of different backgrounds. And we've learned that an urban farm can be just the place where we can learn from one another, exchanging ideas and passions and stories while growing good food for our community. And we've seen how farming can be a common bond to unite us with our land and with our communities. And we've seen how paid work coupled with mentorship can truly be a path forward for many of our youth. And we've learned ultimately that by cultivating a nourishing environment through God's help, we can heal ourselves and one another. Personally, what I have learned is that we can't change our environment or our world without first believing and behaving that we are inextricably tied to one another, especially not without focusing on the growing wealth disparity and inequality that's happening in this very city. So I want to end with a poem written by one of our students this past summer that I think best summarizes our calling. Sprouting out of the ground, we have grown new friendships, built a family of love. It's crazy this is our last day together, like the plants we've pulled out of the ground. You can't fake moments like this. We'll try not to forget the bond that we have made with the soil, not forgetting to grow organic fruit. Roots from every working arm bedded to the farm, we are the farm keepers. Kids looking for work. What better way to work than being keepers of the great Lord's earth? God has brought us together for a reason, making families, changing people's lives. He has brought us here to change. Not only change, but to live the life of influencers. Thank you.